Hello, so this section's all about digestion, the second part of the enzymes and digestion booklet. Now, if you have a little look at this actually shows us all the main processes in a little cartoon. How exciting. So this bit here, is your mouth. So food going in to your mouth is ingestion. Then we've got the teeth carrying out mechanical digestion, which we should know is basically just chopping the food up into smaller bits and mixing it together with saliva by your tongue. We then swallow it and it travels down the esophagus by peristalsis, which is where we have got a lump of food there and the muscle behind it contract and the muscles beneath it relax and it moves downwards, and then it moves down into the stomach where it mixes with gastric juice, and the gastric juice will contain two things: hydrochloric acid. Now, it doesn't actually break up the food, it kills any microbes or bacteria which could be harmful. Then it also contains pepsin, which breaks up protein. Now, as well as that, the acid gives the best pH for the pepsin to work. So that's what happens in the stomach. There's also a little bit of mechanical digestion going on there, where the food is churned up with the acid and the enzymes. So then the food gets swallowed and it goes down into this little region, which is the start of the small intestine, and I'm just going to call it A, and then over here, that part A is the duodenum, and in this part it mixes with pancreatic juice from the pancreas, and also it mixes with bile from the liver, and this cute wee boyo here is just the gallbladder. He's there because he stores bile. So the pancreatic juice and the bile mix together with the food in the duodenum. Now, the pancreatic juice contains some enzymes, so it just finishes off any digestion, and the bile here neutralizes the stomach acid. And then we go into this part here, which is the ileum, or the small intestine, and that's where absorption takes place. And then we've got this shifty looking boyo here, which is the large intestine, and it absorbs water and makes feces. And that's pretty much a little cartoon of the digestive system. So this is the digestive system then. So we'll just go from start to finish. So this is the mouth. As we said, ingestion takes place here, and also mechanical digestion by the teeth and the tongue. Then, as well as that, we've also got the salivary glands up here. Now remember, they produce saliva, which contains amylase, which breaks up starch to sugar. We've then got the esophagus, which moves food by peristalsis, which is shown here. So pretty much what happens is we swallow food, and you can see here that in the wall of the esophagus there are muscles, and what happens is as the food moves down, the muscles in behind the food contract and the muscles in front relax, and that pushes food down the esophagus. Now that also happens everywhere in the digestive system. So even in the small intestine, food is pushed along by peristalsis. So mechanical digestion is when food is taken into the mouth, that's ingestion. The food's then chewed using the teeth and moved around by the tongue, which is mechanical digestion. It breaks it up into smaller pieces, and the purpose of that is to produce a larger surface area for the enzymes to work. So instead of having a big chunk of food, it gets chewed up into smaller pieces, and it basically means that any enzymes can act on all these areas in here, whereas with the bigger chunk, it could only reach the outside. So by having a larger surface area, the enzymes can work better. And the saliva also mixes with the food, which lubricates it. Food then enters the stomach, where it's mixed with gastric juices. Which, as we said, contains acid to kill any microbes and pepsin to break up any proteins. It then goes from the stomach into this little section, which is the duodenum, where it's mixed with both bile and pancreatic juice. And then it goes into the small intestine, where absorption takes place. And then the large intestine, which absorbs water. And then after that, the rectum, and then the anus. So the rectum stores feces, which is basically any waste products, and then they leave the body through the anus. Now, other organs we've got here are the liver, which makes bile, and the pancreas, which produces pancreatic juice. Now, that's the entire digestive system from start to finish. But what is digestion and what's the point of it? So digestion is basically this. Starting off with large insoluble molecules into small, and breaking them down into small soluble ones. Now the reason why they have to be small and soluble is so that they can be absorbed into the blood. Okay, now to show that, there's actually a little experiment. Now this experiment then is known as the model gut. And it shows really clearly why digestion is important. So in this, we've got a test tube which has in it water, and within the water we've got a starch and glucose solution. Now, the thing about starch and glucose is starch is a very, very big molecule, and glucose is very small. So this is starch, which is very big and it's insoluble, and then this is glucose, which is small and soluble. So this is called the model gut because this water here basically acts as the blood. This viscing tubing acts as the small intestine, and the starch and glucose solution pretty much acts as the food. Now, what you do then is you set it up, set the viscing tube in the boiling tube of water and leave it for 15 minutes. Before you start, you test the solution, the mixture which is in the viscing tubing, which remember had starch and glucose in it, and you test it. So you test it and you find out the starch is present. You also find out that glucose is present. You then leave it for 10 minutes and test the blood. And what you find out is that there is no starch in the outside tube or in the water, but there is glucose. So what's happened? Well, this actually shows you what happens, okay? So this here is the viscing tubing. Now we pick that because it is permeable. Now that basically means things can move through it, but only if they're a certain size. So it allows small molecules through. So we've got the viscing tubing here. We've got this part, which is the water, which acts as the blood. And then this is the mixture in here. So we can see that starch is the big molecule, glucose is the little one. So after we leave it for 15 minutes, this is what happens. We can leave it and we see that the glucose actually can move out. Now the reason it can move out is because it's really small, but the starch is too big. So the starch cannot fit out through there. The glucose molecules are small and they can move. So this shows why digestion is so important, because it shows that if a molecule is too large, it can't be absorbed into our blood. So in other words, if we don't break down our food, we can't absorb it into our bloodstream. So it shows that it's important because large insoluble molecules have to be broken down into small soluble ones, because only small soluble ones can be absorbed into the blood. So that's why digestion is important, to break down large insoluble molecules into small soluble ones so they can be absorbed into the blood. Now, in your digestive system, there's 4 processes that take place. Food enters the mouth, and that is ingestion. The next process is food is broken up, which is digestion. Now, part of that happens in the mouth, but it also happens in the stomach, and a little bit of it happens in the duodenum. The next process that happens then is absorption, and that happens in this area, which are the intestines. And then food is excreted through the process of digestion, and that only takes place in your anus. So food enters your mouth as ingestion. That's a bit of a chunky pen. It's broken up into smaller molecules. That happens in the mouth and the ileum. It's absorbed in the ileum and the colon. And then food which can't be digested goes out your anus, and that is egestion. Okay, now mostly the food which can't be digested, which we've mentioned elsewhere in this course, is usually food which contains lots of fibre. The main component of fibre is cellulose, which is from plant cell walls. So we've talked here, we've mentioned a few times about mechanical and chemical digestion. So mechanical is basically when food is broken down by physically breaking it up. And chemical digestion is always carried out by enzymes. So if we take each one here, mechanical digestion first of all is where food is broken down into smaller pieces. 2 examples would be the mouth, where the teeth chew into smaller pieces, and that has the effect of increasing the surface area and allows the enzymes to work much better. It also happens in the stomach, which churns the food and mixes it with acid and enzymes. Chemical digestion is when the food molecules are broken down into small soluble molecules by enzymes. Now, because we've just done enzymes, this is basically what happens. This should be pretty quick for us. So in the mouth, we found amylase. The substrate, which is the substance that it breaks down, is starch, and it breaks it down into simple sugars. Although it is fine to say here glucose. Stomach contains the enzyme pepsin or protease, which breaks down protein into amino acids. The duodenum then contains both amylase, protease, and lipase. Now we're only going to fill in lipase here because these two are the same as they were above. So lipase breaks down fats or lipids into fatty acids and glycerol. Now, the ileum then contains all the ones we've looked at, so amylase, protease, and lipase. The only other one is carbohydrates, which, as the name suggests, breaks down carbohydrates into simple sugars. Now, the final section then of this booklet is all about the ileum. So, the ileum is this area in here, and it's a small intestine. This is what the inside of somebody's ileum looks like. Nice. We'll come back to this. Now, the ileum is where absorption takes place. In this, the food molecules diffuse from the ileum into the blood so that they can be transported around the body. The main things about it is it's highly adapted for absorption because it is long. It is around about 6 meters long. It has lots of folds and it has villi. These three things give it a large surface area so there can be more absorption. It has a good blood supply. It has a thin layer of cells in each villus, and it's also got a permeable membrane. Now, as I say, its main job is to absorb food molecules, and the food molecules travel by diffusion. So from an area of high concentration to low concentration. Now this bit sort of goes along with what we've been saying earlier. So when food is taken into the body in the small intestine, only small particles can pass through it. So this is the gut or the ileum, and this is inside the body's blood. So what we can see here is that, let me do that again. The starch is too big to pass through, whereas the glucose can pass through to the blood. So that's why digestion is important. Starch is a big insoluble molecule and it needs to be broken up into small soluble glucose molecules so it can be absorbed into the blood. And then, as we're saying, the glucose molecules have to diffuse. So diffusion is the movement of molecules from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So in this example, if we go back to it at the start, we have a high concentration of glucose here and a low concentration here, so the glucose molecules diffuse from high to low concentration. This just shows it as well. So we've got the semi-permeable membrane, which is pretty much the wall of the ileum. So the particles move about here. They're in high concentration on the left, and they diffuse over to the right hand side where they're going to be in lower concentration. Now, because it's random, you can sort of see some of them moving backwards and bouncing in and out. And there we go, we've got a few more moving. Now, if we look at the ileum, we said that it's adapted in 3 ways to produce a large surface area. It's very long, it's got little bends in it, or folds, and the wall is covered in villi. So let's look at the ileum then. So here it is, and these little things are its villi. Now, for the food to pass through it, it has to pass through and past all of these villi. If we look at the villi in a little bit more detail and zoom in this area, these are the little villi. So we can see here that these little food molecules are going to come into contact with the villi, and then they're going to get absorbed into the villi, travel down, and then into the blood vessels. So let's look at it in a bit more detail. So here we've got the ileum, or the small intestine. Here you can see the little folds. So the food's going to move in here and then down through here. And as it moves through, if it's been broken up, it'll get absorbed. So we then zoom in this area and we see the little villi. We also see the muscles around the outside, which move the food along by peristalsis. If we zoom in the villi, we can see even more detail. So around the outside, we've got a really thin layer of cells. This thin layer of cells provides us with a short diffusion distance. So it's much faster for us to absorb food. The next thing that we've got then is a good blood supply, and the blood goes in to the villi, and then it goes into this little capillary, which is this very small blood vessel. Now, the villi have a really good blood supply, and we'll talk about why that's important later on, but that's where we find the blood supply in a villus. The main things that get absorbed there are glucose and amino acids. The next thing that we've got then is this thing which goes right up the centre, and that is known as a lacteal. That is Lacteal, lacteal. It absorbs glycerol and fatty acids. Now, it's not correct to say that they absorb fats, because fats get digested into fatty acids and glycerol. So that's why it's important to say that and not just fats. Now let's look at the adaptations of each one and talk about why this is actually important. So one of the first things to start with is each villus having an extensive capillary network, or you can call this a good blood supply. So the whole ileum is well supplied with blood to transport the absorbed products of digestion. Now remember, that's the whole point of the blood system, to transport substances around the body. The products of digestion, once absorbed, are quickly transported away and replaced with blood low in digested food molecules, which maintains a steep concentration gradient. Now, this part, steep concentration gradient. If we compare, say we had a little graph, and we compared the food in the ileum with the amount of food in the blood, and this is concentration. The concentration of food in the ileum would be very high, concentration of food in the blood would be very low. If we join the dots between there and there, we get a steep gradient. Now, if there's a steep gradient, there's going to be faster diffusion from high to low concentration. So, the point of the ileum having a good blood supply is this. If this is the ileum and this is the blood vessel beside the ileum here. So in fact, we'll draw the ileum in this. Now, these are the food molecules, and they're traveling this way. So what we're saying here is that there's a high concentration of food there in the ileum, but there's a low concentration here. So at the minute, there's a steep concentration gradient. So what's going to happen is the food molecules diffuse from high to low concentration. But then it would get to a certain point where if this blood wasn't moving, we'd get a high concentration here and their concentration would even out. But what happens is very clever. When the food molecules diffuse from the area of high concentration to low concentration, they get carried away. So this means that the blood coming through here always has a low concentration of food. So there's always more food in the ileum than the blood. So there's a steep concentration gradient. So just to summarise that, the food diffuses from the high concentration, which is in ileum, to an area of low concentration, which is in the blood. The blood then transports the molecules away. This keeps the concentration of the food higher in the ileum than in the blood. So in other words, it maintains the steep concentration gradient. Now, just to finish the ileum off here, it's highly adapted for absorption because it's long, which gives us a large surface area. It's folded, which gives a large surface area, and it has villi, which also has a large surface area. Now, as well as that, it's highly adapted for absorption because it's got a good blood supply, which maintains the steep concentration gradient away. It maintains the steep concentration gradient because it transports the absorbed molecules away. It's got a thin layer of cells, so there's a short diffusion distance, and there's a permeable membrane, so it allows the molecules to be absorbed easily. So summarising this table, these three adaptations increase the surface area, good blood supply, maintains the steep concentration gradient, the thin layer of surface cells, anything to do with thin layers means that there's a short diffusion distance because diffusion is faster over a shorter distance, and a permeable membrane allows small molecules to enter the blood. Now, the last thing about this is sometimes you can get questions asking you for adaptations of the ileum or adaptations of the villi. If you get asked about adaptations of the ileum, you can say all of these. If it's adaptations of the villi, you can only say these. You cannot say that villi have folds or are long because that's just not what they are. Villi are very, very small and they definitely don't have folds. And that's digestion finished. So long, biatches.